Beautiful. David, welcome back to the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Guy. I'm so excited. Thanks for inviting me back.
Oh, I've been genuinely excited about this, and catching up again. Our conversations have always been insightful and they tend to organically go in their own direction anyway. And
Yeah.
I'm fascinated because you got a new book out as well, Why Woo Woo Works. And
Yeah.
when I saw the title, I just had the biggest smile on my face, because as a Welshman, you being a Scotsman, being a Welshman, woo woo wasn't in my vocabulary. I was one of those guys that would go, what the hell? That's too woo woo for me. I'm not even going down there. And now I'm having conversations that are as woo woo as they can get, I think, half the time, I'm fascinated with yourself because I believe you've been doing a master's in mathematics as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's a full honours degree in mathematics and physics. Just something I do on the side.
Wow. Yeah. So what fascinates me, because you talked about, I'd love to dig into your background in a sec as well about you were an organic chemist.
Yeah.
You're doing that. So there's clearly a thinking left brain, put pieces together, which I just haven't got, right? And then, but on the other side, you're writing a book called Why Woo Woo Works. It's in some respects feels like the polar opposite. Have you always kind of been in both of these camps from the start, or were you on one and then discovered the other?
No, very much both, actually. I've always been like that. I've always had an interest in the woo-woo. And you know why, actually? See, when I was about 11 years old, I was in the school library. My mum at the time was struggling with postpartum depression, and it wasn't very well understood in the 1970s. It was after the birth of my youngest sister in 1976. I've got three sisters, and she didn't really get the right advice or treatment. So I just had this feeling like I wanted to help my mum. And I remember I was in the school library. I was 11 years old. I just started secondary school, and a book fell off the shelf. And I know that sounds woo-woo, but it fell off the shelf, and it was called The Magic Power of Your Mind by a man called Walter Germain. And I just knew that's going to help my mum. And so I just took it, put it in my bag and left. I didn't know that you're supposed to join a library. I just borrowed it, And it didn't cure my mum's depression, but it really helped her because it taught her things like meditation and affirmations, and they kind of helped her to navigate a course through some of the difficult days. So when I was a teenager growing up, my mum and I often had these woo-woo conversations about the power of the mind, and it set me into a questioning and figuring things out about life, the universe. But at the same time, I ended up going through the mainstream honours degree, PhD, research and development job. So I had two kind of lives running parallel, if you will, that took a long time before they kind of knitted themselves together, I feel like.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I can certainly relate to that. So why an organic chemist? Because I'm fascinated, and from listening to you talk and how that actually does lean into, like you say, the placebo and different aspects of the work that you write about now. But what attracted you to that in the first place? And what was the biggest lesson, I guess, you got from all your time doing it?
What really attracted me to organic chemistry is I wanted to contribute to finding a cure for cancer. Because when you do a chemistry PhD, and what my specialism in my final year of my chemistry, honours degree, my specialism was biological and medicinal chemistry. And that's when you start to realise the applications of chemistry to life and to, discovering cures for diseases. And I realised that, one way to find a cure for cancer is to design an organic molecule. It's like a chain of carbons and hydrogens and nitrogens, what we call drugs nowadays. And so what drew me into the subject was I just wanted to help to cure cancer. And that was given my expertise, that was the only thing I could think of contributing. And so when an opportunity came up to do a PhD in organic chemistry to actually research the intricacies of how to actually build a molecule that might well play a role in cancer research, that's what drew me into it, to be really honest.
That's amazing. So
Yeah.
what's going on there then? Is it just all like a process of information exchange, and we're just trying to create different information so the body responds differently? Is that what's
In
going
a,
on?
in a sense, I mean, organic chemistry is like Lego. It's like children who play with Lego blocks, the plastic or the wooden coloured blocks. And out of those blocks of different shapes and sizes, you can assemble a variety of objects, like a car or a building or something. So an organic chemist does exactly the same thing, but instead of, you know, plastic or wooden blocks, we use building blocks called atoms. It's the same idea, but I don't build cars and buildings, but build drugs. But it's the same idea. You stick a couple of carbons here, then maybe a nitrogen out here, an oxygen there, and you twist it round, bend the geometry of it, and try to shape it in such a way. If you understand a biological process, you could shape it in such a way to fit in there and make something go that way instead of that way, so to speak. And so I found it really, really fascinating. In a sense, what you're actually trying to do is change the way something happens to make something go in a beneficial direction. So that's what I was really doing, and for a while before
Yeah.
I changed the
Wow.
course of things.
Yeah, well, big time, right? You've got
Yeah,
you're in a completely different trajectory now. I
yeah.
think is it this your 11th book you've written?
11th, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Wow,
never
that's
imagined when I
insane.
was a research and development scientist that I would write a book one day called Why Woo Woo Works. Because when you're in the mainstream
Yeah.
research and development, you're developing, you're using all the mainstream tools and you're doing all the mainstream thing. Even though I had that interest in that other world that was running kind of parallel, I always kept that from my friends. It was always something, an interest I had. And I didn't see how the two worlds could ever come together, which they are now. But so it was just always something on the side. So I just kind of almost parked it for a little while.
Got yeah.
Yeah.
So when did those worlds started merging? Because I know you've spoken about the placebo effect, and you were
Yeah.
seeing in some of the testing that the obviously some of the people that weren't taking the prescribed drugs were having just as
Yeah.
good as results. Is that does that mean then we have the pharmacy already within us? We just need to signal it at
Yeah,
the end
we
of the
have we
day as
have a
well.
lot of incredible pharmacy inside of us that we're only just beginning to tap into because I started to witness in drugs that I was involved in. My main fields were cancer and cardiovascular, and I started to
Hmm.
notice even stuff that I was working on, particularly the cardiovascular, when it's more obvious that people were improving on placebos. And I thought, isn't this absolutely fascinating? That something is going on. And when I started to research it in my spare time, I mean, not because it was never something you would be paid to do in the industry. So I just started fiddling around with things in my own time and understanding that when you believe something, like if I believe this medicine will help me, then you start mobilizing the pharmacy that's already there inside your brain and body. And we have a vast pharmacy. We just haven't even tapped into understanding it. But what then happens is the body, as we mobilize that pharmacy and move the body in the brain and the body in the direction that we believe is supposed to occur. And so that's pretty much how it works.
Yeah, that's incredible. And
Yeah.
what kind of like over the years as well, with you seeing that, were there
Mm.
things that you were seeing you were going like, oh, I never would have thought that in a million years, kind of thing, or is it just was it subtle things as well? Because I guess there's so much information out there, and it's like,
Mm.
how powerful are our beliefs at the end of the day? You know,
Well, it was more for me. It was more of a repetition of seeing the same thing to the point that the idea
right?
was so incredibly compelling, and recognizing that I think one of the real breakthroughs for me was when I started probing into the understanding what is it that causes belief to, in a sense, fiddle around with your biology. What is it that causes that? And realizing that there was some research that had been done even before, even when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. That was a light bulb moment for me. It was a study when people were receiving placebo dental injections. Like if you're getting a tooth extracted or a filling and you get the injection to numb the pain. Well, people were getting placebo versions but yet the brain was producing, on a placebo, the brain was producing its own natural version of morphine. And I thought, that's amazing. I understand how now belief actually causes these physical effects. It's not, because I remember asking colleagues and they would say, they're not really getting better. They just think they're getting better, and the placebo effect was swept under the table. It's the natural course of illness. And I believed that a little bit, because that's what my senior colleagues were saying. It's just the natural course. And you look at placebo medical trials, all these people that improved in the placebo, that was going to happen anyway. So it was just the conventional wisdom. And you just, as a junior scientist at the time, you just sort of accept that. But I started, there's something going on here. And I looked and I found that research. I thought, wow, it's not just all in the mind. They don't just get better. Their brain is producing morphine. It's the natural version. It's called an endogenous opiate. Morphine is an opiate. So an endogenous opiate means something endogenous to the body. It's something that's already here. It's part of your own pharmacy. It's endogenous to your own body. It's part of your own pharmacy. And that was being activated because someone believed that this injection, even though it was salt water, it was saline, this injection will numb the pain. And it did numb the pain, but not because that was going to happen anyway, or it was a natural course of things, but because the belief itself produced out of the pharmacy that was already there. It produced natural morphine, and it was the natural morphine that killed the pain. And that for me was, oh my God, there's an actual real biological process. So that really accelerated how much my interest in this became, and to the point that I realized I could start to see how these worlds could actually knit together. Because what if we understood this? If we really understood and harnessed this, we could actually learn to bring East and West together, if you will, to bring the mainstream and the woo-woo together in a way that maybe this could supplement and amplify this. It doesn't always have to be that or that. It could be, what about a fusion of the two, where we can actually learn to use the best that we have to supplement or add to anything else. And it's just an extra tool. And I thought, I became lit up with that. And so that became one of my, I guess that was the first domino that began to fall to catalyze my exit from the pharmaceutical industry.
Got it. Yeah. And do you feel those worlds are emerging, or do you think it's still very dogmatic? Pharmaceutical industries like, nah, this is the only way forward, forget the rest? Or do you think we are slowly coming together?
We're definitely coming together. In the UK, we have an institute of doctors, of medical doctors, called the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. And there's something very similar in the US that started at the Spalding Rehabilitation Center and Harvard Medical School. And it educates doctors, and it's mostly younger doctors who have this, right, really this motivation to heal and like more idealistic, I suppose. And it's all about training doctors to make lifestyle interventions and not necessarily always relying on drugs, because, they'll openly say that maybe 60 to 70% of people that come into a doctor's surgery are presenting with, meaning they have symptoms of stuff that is actually preventable or reversible given enough lifestyle change. So what these lifestyle doctors do is, rather than right away prescribing medicine, they say, how about we try this first? Like, you've got high blood pressure. Okay, rather than just putting you on a tablet, let's try for a month, and I'll keep track of you, and we'll keep in touch. Let's see if we can try this change. And here's what I would like you to eat. One of my friends, a doctor, actually takes patients once a month to the local supermarket, and she teaches them what foods to buy, how to read labels, and says, you want to avoid that aisle, and see if you can read all these ingredients, put it back, don't want it, and teaches them, and they get education in what you should be eating to maybe reduce blood pressure, or to even reverse diabetes and all that kind of stuff. And so there's an increase, a vastly increasing number of younger doctors becoming lifestyle medicine practitioners, not instead of prescribing medicines for acute and serious things or surgery, but in addition to. And what they're doing, sometimes it's more of this and less of that, but other times it's more of that one and less of that. But definitely there's a happy fusion. So that is growing in popularity, absolutely, in the UK and also in the United States. I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but it's certainly happening here. And so, yeah, I was very aware of that. All I did with the new book was say, well, there is other things as well. There's other, what we call alternative practices, that also can supplement the change in diet and the change in exercise levels. Because part of the lifestyle medicine doctors, it's not just diet. They prescribe exercise and they prescribe, working on your stress levels. So that there's different pillars that they bring into it. But it's definitely these worlds are absolutely coming together. Even if many people haven't noticed it yet, it is absolutely, you can Google, if you're going to see a doctor now, you can search in the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine and you can find which doctors have prescribed lifestyle medicine and you can get an appointment with them.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And the wonderful thing is that feeds into everything that you're talking about is that you're giving somebody back their power as well.
Yeah.
And through that power and taking control, it will create a positive attitude, no doubt, that will then feed into the overall recovery.
Yeah. And a person starts to believe in themselves, Guy. And I think that's really important as well, because when a person starts to feel empowered, I can contribute to this. Let's say I've got high blood pressure. I don't have to just take these tablets. There's something I can do. The choices that I'm making today and every day for the next few months by altering my diet and taking more exercise, I can play a role in this. And how empowering is that? When you're not just given something to take, but you're recognizing, I've done this and I've managed to reduce my blood pressure by choices that I've made. And it's inspiring for people. And then it's easier to keep it up because you know what you've just done, what you've achieved for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I love it. So I want to ask you, with your new book, right? Woo Woo, why Woo Woo works. And I'm curious as well, because I haven't read the book, but I've been skimming through the chapters today, David. And I smiled at some of the chapters. I was like, wow, we're going woo woo here,
Yeah.
Like, when you wrote the book, what did you have in mind? And like, is there been a barometer of woo woo? Like, how far down the woo woo barometer would you say you're going in the woo woo category? What is woo woo to you?
I went the full spectrum. Woo woo is actually defined as, in the Oxford Dictionary, it's defined as unconventional beliefs regarded as having little or no scientific basis, especially those pertaining to spirituality, mysticism, and alternative health. And the name itself, the term woo-woo, is believed to have been coined in the 1980s as a derogatory term, in relation to the woo-woo sounds, the wailing sounds that ghosts would make in the old black and white movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s. So it was an imitation of the wailing sound that somebody somewhere just called spirituality, mysticism, or alternative health woo-woo. And the name just kind of stuck round about then. That's the first real mention of it in that context round about the 1980s, as far as I could tell. And so there's a full spectrum of it. So in the book, I started with kind of stuff that some people think of as woo-woo, like how belief changes biochemistry, like how the placebo effect works, and even meditation. Even though meditation has found a foot in the mainstream, it's still, to many people, woo-woo. In fact, I know loads of people who've never tried it who still think meditation, what's that all about? So I've got a chapter on that, and even a chapter on how traumatic life experiences, particularly in childhood, can be correlated with illness in adulthood, and ways that we can actually begin to turn that around. And then I move into more kind of, how exposure to nature itself can be healing, and actually why that impacts us at a genetic level. And then you go into the kind of biofield, hands-on healing, crystals, even stuff that's getting into really big woo-woo. But then I go into stuff that some people would call it, like the high end of woo-woo, like prayer and, thinking compassionate thoughts about people who might be on the other side of the world. And amazingly, there's this compelling statistical evidence from that. Scientists even studying people separated by a distance, one in an MRI scanner, and yet their brain patterns are correlated with the experiences of the other person, if and only if if and only if they share an emotional bond, kind of thing. So I explored all that basis. So the full, I guess, the full spectrum of what some people might call woo-woo. And that was really just because these are subjects that I had an interest in. And I also felt a lot of people I talked to have an interest in those subjects. So I picked the subjects, one that there was a lot of research available, but most people still think of as woo-woo because they don't know that the evidence is available. So I thought, well, that'd be interesting to show them that there really is a heck of a lot of evidence. But secondly, these are subjects that just by chatting to people, these are the ones that most people wanted to know about how they worked. So
fascinating. Yeah, and I wonder, because I've, even in my notes here, I've got crystals and a smiley face, right, in my notes here.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you a brief story, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure.
Because a good mate of mine has a good mate. So somebody I work with, Matt, his good friend works in a crystal shop in Mullumbimby. Now, I don't know if you've been to this part of the world, Byron Bay and Mullumbimby and that, but I think Mullumbimby is as woo-woo in Australia. I think you could live anywhere. And they have what's called the crystal chair. Okay, now the guy that opened the shop said he built the chair first because he always had crystals, and he said the chair told me to then open a shop to put the chair in, so then he could then let people freely come in. And there's this whole story behind it. So I go in and sit in this chair, and there's all these crystals at different meridian points and different energy centers and all the rest of it. And I sat in this chair, David, and I know nothing about crystals, right? And after about 10 minutes, oh my God, my whole body was just vibrating. Part of my face just kind of fully relaxed. It was like one side of my face just completely let go. And I got off that thing just going, what the hell was that? You know? And I remember I went home, I had to have a sleep for about an hour. And then I got up and I was just like, my God, I feel amazing. So I've always been curious. So from your perspective, why is that in the book, and what have you learned around that over the years? Because I never thought I'd be talking about crystals.
Well, neither did I, actually. You know, I never imagined that in a book where I was trying to, you know, one of my main goals in the book was be really credible and make sure that the science is absolutely solid. And I thought, you know, lots of people are saying, oh, could you do a chapter on crystals? And I'm going, well, I don't really know of any research. But then I uncovered an astonishing amount of how they work. Not medical studies on them, because those haven't been done, but a heck of a lot of research on how they work. I mean, for example, I've got one here just in case, because I had a feeling that you might ask me something on it. So that's a citrine crystal, but it's a bit like quartz in the sense that it's really, really clear. Now, there's 3 distinct ways that crystals work. The first way is quartz crystal has a physical property called diamagnetism. Now, what diamagnetism means is, imagine if it's pouring down with rain and the rain's coming down like straight. If I want to protect myself, I put an umbrella up. And what the umbrella will do is it'll deflect the path of the rain so that the rain then bends around me. Now, if some unfortunate soul was standing beside me, they'd get twice as much rain because the rain's going to bounce it off my umbrella and dump it on them. So a diamagnetic substance does something very similar, but it's not the rain it's bending, it's the Earth's magnetic field. So what that means is the Earth's magnetic field is bent around it, and anything to the side is going to get a little bit more of it. So like a crystal, for example, the Earth's magnetic field's coming down and it bends around it. And so anything here gets a wee bit more of the Earth's magnetic field. So in one part of, there's 3 parts to the crystal chapter. In one part, I explored research that shows that increasing or decreasing the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field accelerates or decelerates the growth rate of plants and even the amount of chlorophyll and iron uptake in plants. And there's research in that. It's called plant magnetoreception. And there's a lot of interest in the science of it, because scientists now, because we're more serious about space exploration than ever before, it's what are the consequences of transporting seeds, for example, or plants in a spacecraft that isn't subject to the Earth's magnetic field? Will they still grow in the absence of the Earth's magnetic field? Even if we can find some nice soil on Mars, what will be the consequence when Mars's magnetic field is significantly different from the Earth's? So there's a lot of research on just tweaking, increasing, decreasing Earth's magnetic field, and it makes a huge difference to the growth rate, even biomass accumulation in a plant, huge growth. So my first approach in the chapter was to demonstrate that a diamagnetic substance, by fiddling around with the Earth's magnetic field intensity, can have an effect. There's no research into it. I did a few experiments myself, but there's no formal research into it. But I just pointed out that it can have, and if we can't just dismiss the sitting on crystal chairs. We can't just dismiss it, because in fact, pseudoscience is dismissing something based on a belief without investigating the evidence yourself, not the stuff being dismissed as pseudoscience. But pseudoscience itself is dismissing something based on a belief without taking the time to investigate it yourself. And so I thought, I'm taking the time here, and I think there is something in the physical property of crystals that fiddles around with the Earth's magnetic field. Perhaps lots of crystals together at one point, different types, might generate quite an interesting tweak to the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field, so that we can actually feel it, differently. Because there's research at Caltech in America where they actually put people in an electromagnetic shielded room. They replicated the Earth's magnetic field, and then they rotated it. And they just rotated it, the Earth's magnetic field. So the lines, instead of going that way, they were going up the way. But you can't see it. So they rotated the field inside this electromagnetically shielded cage. Do you know, every single person's brainwaves abruptly changed. They couldn't feel anything, but their brainwaves abruptly changed. In other words, the brain was absolutely in sync with the local Earth magnetic field, not just the intensity of it, but whether it was pointed in that direction or that direction. So there's a fascinating research that shows we are absolutely sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field, because biology has evolved within the natural tone, if you will, of the Earth's magnetic field. So I approach crystals in that way, but also in another way, like the clarity of a crystal. In a Buddhist tradition called Dzogchen, the clarity of a crystal is used as what's called the mental representation, where the clarity represents mentally the state of clarity that one wishes to attain through the meditation and the spiritual practice. Now, in cognitive psychology, if you have a mental representation of some way, then it helps you move towards something. So that's another link I made with crystals. Because of what they mean to us, because of what that represents, the clarity, even it comes from the Earth itself, it's a mental representation. And so because I have a representation to focus my attention on, it makes it easier to get clearer in state, like if you hold or see a crystal, because its clarity points you towards that state I would like to attain. So I covered a section on mental representations and how and why they actually work. And then the last section on crystals was color psychology, like in terms of using crystals in jewelry and stuff like that, and even just having them visible. The science of color psychology shows, and marketers use it all over the world, to sell products. For example, a shop window with red in it encourages impulse buying. If you put blue lighting, it creates a calming effect and stuff. So I cited a lot of research in color psychology and saying that crystals of a certain color, because of what the color represents, can actually cause behavioral change in people and even neurological change. In fact, one study I cited, volunteers were given a cherry flavored drink, but the scientists put a green dye in it. So even though it was cherry flavored, it was colored bright green. 37% of people couldn't taste cherry, and they swore that the flavor was lemon or lime. In other words, the brain processed the taste based on the color more than what it actually was itself. In other words, the color itself was changing the activity of the brain in flavor processing regions. And so I pointed out that crystals may have an effect on that basis as well, because of their color and what the color represents to us in the psyche.
Wow, that's amazing. I did not expect you to say that. Like, that's phenomenal. Yeah.
I didn't expect to uncover all that kind of research. When I started diving into it, I wasn't going to put a chapter on crystals, but then the more logical stuff like that I found, I thought, isn't that absolutely compelling? That's really, really fascinating. And it just seemed to fit in with the context of the book. And because it answered a question that many people, when I was writing this, had asked me when people knew I was writing it. Loads of people. It's probably the most popular request for what could you cover in the book. And I thought, isn't this interesting? Chapter on crystals. And I kept saying, well, you know, I don't know of any research. And it was only when I just started out of curiosity. I didn't Google science of crystals, but I knew a little bit about some things, you know, because I'm towards the end of a degree in mathematics and physics. I knew about diamagnetism and paramagnetism, which is instead of an umbrella, it's a funnel. But so I knew about what that is. And I knew about I knew about substances which have diamagnetic or paramagnetic activity. So I knew about that. So I started out there, just out of curiosity.
Got it.
Really.
Well, you've definitely got me wanting to look into it more. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, just from listening to you then. You know, funnily enough, I only spoke to a lady at a workshop. I think it was a few months ago before we were putting another lockdown. Anyway, and she was here and she was telling me about a friend that decided when lockdown hit was to start an online business, and she thought she'd sell a few crystals. And I think within 12 months, they haven't been able to get enough stock. They're struggling with staff.
Wow.
You know, she said it's just been unbelievable what's been happening. They're definitely a real thing. Yeah, for sure. I'm curious as well, when writing a book like this, was there anything that even took you by surprise, where you're going, whoa, really? Like, is that possible? Or do you think you've been so submersed in this work for quite some time now, you kind of knew what you were getting?
Guy, I would say probably a bit of both. I have had a background interest in all of this for a long time anyway. But I think one of the statistics I think that really landed firmly with me is that a number of studies, and scientific studies in the field of psi, and your psi is a collective umbrella term for things like parapsychology, ESP, you know, prayer, the evidence for prayer, distant healing, presentiment, you know, that idea that the human nervous system can sense the future before it occurs, that type of thing, intuition, all comes under the umbrella of psi. That many of these studies in psi, the statistical data exceeds a threshold called 6 sigma. Now that means 6 standard deviations from the mean. To put that into context, when the Higgs boson, many people listening will remember back in 2012, the 4th of July, there was a discovery of the Higgs boson at CERN, the big particle accelerator in Geneva in Switzerland. And it was called the God particle. It was the last particle that would confirm the standard model of physics. Now, it was widely accepted, celebrated all over the world. And what underlined it, discovery, was that it exceeded a statistical threshold called 5 sigma, which is 5 standard deviations from the norm. And that means, you know, it's a 1 in 3.4 million likelihood of it being anything other than the Higgs boson. So it was widely accepted, celebrated. Peter Higgs, who first predicted it, won the Nobel Prize from that. But yet the data for many psi studies, prayer, distant healing, ESP, etc., exceeds the 6 sigma threshold. 1 standard deviation, even better than that, like 1 billion to 1 evidence. And that, realizing that fact was that, my God, why do people not know about this? And then I was reading a great book by one of the leaders in this field, a guy called Dean Radin, and he cites some research in his book called Real Magic. And Dean is one of the premier the lead researchers in the world, very highly credible guy, chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in the US. And he cited some stuff about the chairman of the American Statistical Association, just 5 years ago, was giving her presidential address to 6,000 statisticians in the US. And statisticians are who actually tell you statistically if something is true or not. And in her presidential address, she cited work that she had done for the US government during the Cold War into psi and its reality. And she said it's true, it's real. And she stood by it to this day. And she said that in her presidential address, that even the data is very strong, and if it related to something more mundane, it would be widely accepted. And so, given the data, we would, if it wasn't psi, this woo-woo thing, given the strength of the statistical data, it would be widely accepted as fact. But because it's psi and that's considered woo-woo, most people dismiss it as woo-woo or pseudoscience without ever looking at the data. And I would say dismissing something as pseudoscience without looking at the data yourself is pseudoscience itself, not the stuff that you're dismissing as pseudoscience, in some fitting irony, funnily enough. So when I realized that kind of stuff, even though I always believed in the phenomena, because I've had, like many people, I've had some experiences myself that I couldn't explain in any logical manner. But that statistical data, that it just landed more firmly in my psyche than it ever had before. And so it wasn't that I didn't know about it. It was just so surprising to realize the strength of the data.
Incredible, right? And then it comes to the point, well, why aren't more people looking at this, and why don't we know more about it if it's that powerful?
Yeah,
I don't know if there's any.
It's because it sounds woo-woo, and that's the thing. We don't look at it, we don't accept it because it sounds too woo-woo. And so one of my reasons for including that kind of stuff in the book is to say, well, it isn't really woo-woo. And so I had to then investigate consciousness. Is consciousness inside our heads? Because if it was inside our heads, then all of that psi stuff is false, right? So consciousness can't be inside our heads. And there is some strong philosophical grounding for the idea that consciousness is something fundamental to nature. It just feels like it's inside our head. And that ties in with, some of the Eastern philosophies, what we might call non-duality, that there's an infinite unbounded consciousness and that we're all individuations of it, like colours in a rainbow. And, there's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, individual colours in a rainbow, that if they were little people, they would think of themselves as separate from each other, but they're all part of the same white light. And so in the East, there's a strong philosophical grounding. In the West, we call that philosophy idealism, but it's really the same as the Eastern non-duality. So I said, if all the psi research is true and the statistical evidence is sound, then consciousness cannot be inside our heads. It must be something fundamental to nature. And so I was nervous about writing that, because as a scientist, most scientists accept the mainstream position that it's inside your head, even though there's no proof that that's the case. And if you ask most scientists, they'll just say it seems to be what's accepted, but there's no actual real proof of that kind of idea. So I decided, even though I felt nervous about writing it, I thought, well, what kind of scientist would I be if I wasn't willing to say, well, okay, the model that we use doesn't fit the data, so we have to change the model. So I decided, I'm saying, well, this is what I think is the case. I didn't say it's a fact. I just said, given the data, this is probably true, or something like it has to be true if all that psi research is actually true. So I explored all that idea of consciousness. Where does it come from inside in the book as well?
Yeah, it's a big topic, and it's a question I've asked many people on the show, actually, and I've had many great people. I've had a NASA physicist on here talking about this, saying that's what the conclusions he's come to.
Wow,
I've had Amit Goswami. I literally had him on a few weeks ago, speaking about it. Him and Valentina Osoro. They were beautiful people, and maybe I'm just too dialed into my little podcast world these days, David, because it's like, to me, I'm fully kind of engaged in that kind of concept these days, from, I guess, looking at this work a long time.
Yeah. But, I actually cited a piece of Amit Goswami's work in the book, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, because he did some work looking at exploring the connectedness between people. One's connected to an EEG helmet and the other one is in another room. And yet the brain waves of this person were reacting to the experiences of the other. And they tested people that had sat together in meditation and tried to feel each other's presence. And only when they did that was there a correlation in the brain waves. But if they didn't try to feel each other's presence in meditation, create an emotional bond, there wasn't a correlation. And so it was some of Goswami's research that first brought that into the physics community, where they said, okay, I'm a physicist. Is this some relative of quantum entanglement between brains, because this is incredible. And they called it, this leaves no room for doubt about the existence of an unusual phenomena. And so it was Amit Goswami's work that I cited actually in one part of that chapter. Yeah. Small world.
Fantastic. And yeah. And I'm going to ask you one other question before I change gears on the podcast, because I heard you quote it today and I was like, wow, I've not heard that before. And that was the many worlds theory. And I was wrapping my head around that, because I guess as you lean into this work more, you start to ponder on things and how things work. But if there's a veil and what's actually happening moment to moment. So I'd love you just to touch on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, in quantum physics, there's different interpretations of phenomena, and the idea that a particle, that something could be a wave and a particle at the same time, or it can be in two places seemingly at the same time. It could be a field and a particle kind of thing. And there's different interpretations. The mainstream one's called the Copenhagen interpretation, and most people are familiar with the idea that something collapses the wave function. But another interpretation that's very strong and really growing in popularity among professional physicists is called the many worlds interpretation. And at every moment, there are multiple copies of something. So a wave and a particle, there's one reality, a world, a universe where it's a wave, and there's another reality, another universe where it's a particle. The famous Schrodinger's cat, the cat is both alive and dead. In one world, the cat's alive. In another world, that it's dead. And now what we're actually doing in life as we make choices is we're flicking between worlds. Like you might take a book and you might, flick through the pages and go, and you can see all the pages flicking. It's like there's each page is a different world, a different universe. So that's why it's called the many worlds. And so the choices that are being made, we're literally flicking through the pages. So the reality that you experience is consistent with your thinking. If you move it into a philosophical concept range, the world that you experience is that consistent with your thinking and what you believe. It's not that you're actually physically changing things. You're literally flicking to a world that's entirely consistent with what you've just thought, kind of thing. So right now, there's an infinite number of Guy Lawrences and an infinite number of me right now. But
happening right now.
In different dimensions of reality. And so you can never experience another copy of you. But when you make choices in your life or visualize or decide, I want this to happen or that to happen, what we're really doing is we're flicking through worlds, like rifling through pages of a book, and it's going as we flick the pages. And that's what the many world. I mean, in physics, they don't take it to its philosophical end. They just talk about in terms of mathematics. Mathematically, this is what's going on. But if you blend it with the philosophical ideas of idealism or non-duality, then what we would then say is you're not just mathematically creating different worlds, that we're physically moving, or in our consciousness moving between worlds. That as well.
That's incredible, eh?
It's fascinating.
So does that mean then that for all of us, there's a potential, if we choose to think it and move towards it, there's a potential already existing out there. We just need to work towards it. But ultimately, it's our conditioning and beliefs and our traumas and experiences that are getting in the way of allowing us to actually reach.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Guy. I think it's our traumas and beliefs and the weight of our past experiences that make it seem like we have less power than we do. It makes us seem like we can't change things because there's the psychological weight of past experience that for many people make it very difficult to flick too far from where you actually have always been. But what it does suggest is there are infinite possibilities. I cover, the last chapter of the book, I covered the law of attraction, or what we call the law of attraction. And in that context, I suggest that there is vast potential for each of us. But just like you you summed it up so well there. The weight of our traumas and past experiences condition us to believe that X, Y, or Z isn't possible for me. And so what if it was? What if we could get around that past conditioning? Then what I suggested is I think that there's far more potential for us to live our greatest hopes and dreams than we previously would even admit to ourselves. And it's really just the heaviness of past traumas and the heaviness of life experience. It's always been this way, and this is always what's happened for me. And it's real, but it's heaviness, psychological heaviness, that condition us to think that I'm probably just going to keep going in the same direction. But definitely we have potential to go over there and flick to a different part of the book.
Mate, I couldn't agree more. And, just to, I thought then is to humanize it a bit as well, because it's interesting. I found, because I get to meet a lot of people that listen to my podcast when I finally run workshops again and stuff like that, right? And they go, oh, you're so normal, but I'm so used to listening to you every week and all the rest of it. I'm like, yeah, I'm just a guy from Wales that gets in front of a microphone. There's no different, right? But there's an element of thinking, oh, it's okay, we got it in the bag, right? But talking to you off air, you actually spoke about going in a new trajectory where you wanted to write books and actually follow the heart. And to me, it sounds like that's the work, but you're implementing it, And I guess the question is, how did you do it? What were the key elements to allow you to transition? Because I know so many people that are in that place right now, David.
Yeah. So for me, my understanding of the placebo effect had been growing, but I never really thought I would do anything. But I'd always had this dream, even during my PhD. I remember in the middle of my PhD thinking, I don't want to be a professional scientist or a professional chemist. I don't want to be an organic chemist in a lab all my life. I want to educate. I want to inspire. Because I always had this kind of knack for coaching. If people in the lab were struggling, I would always coach them to believe in themselves. And it was something I loved doing, is just helping people to feel good about themselves, to recognize how great they were. And even when I was a scientist, I became an athletics coach. And I coached, I managed a junior team, like an under 20 men's team, in one of the UK's largest athletics club. And we got to the final of 3 successive championships. The young team won the British championships. And I just loved, doing that kind of stuff. And so even while I worked as a professional chemist, I thought, I want to teach, I want to educate and inspire. And at the same time as I was doing the athletics coaching, ideas of the placebo effect were coming in. And I started to formulate in my mind. It was a dream that I didn't ever honestly think I would do anything about. If I'd be really honest, it was just like a dream that we all have. And you don't think you'll ever do it, but it always feels so great. And I knew in my heart, I thought, I want to write books and educate and inspire. I want to be a teacher. I want to stand at conferences and do interviews and help people to believe in themselves, that they're capable of great things, much more than you think you are. But it was just a background dream. And then one day I was attending a personal development seminar run by Tony Robbins, a big, tall American. And it was called Unleash the Power of Within. And it was in Wales, Guy. It was in Cardiff. And it was in Cardiff, 1999, July 1999. And Tony did I was so enamored with him. I thought he was an amazing, I loved what he was doing. I thought, that's what I want to do. What Tony Robbins is doing, he's making people feel so good. People are feeling so lit up and they believe that they can achieve anything. I want to do what he's going to do, but I've got science to blend. I want to blend science into it. I want to blend the science of compassion and kindness and the roots of love and the understanding of all the stuff that I didn't even make sense in my own head. I just sort of knew that there was something that I would do that was my own unique contribution to that way, that type of education, inspiration, bringing my own stuff into it. It took me a while to find how to do that. But during that seminar, he did this big meditation and he said, think of a time in your life when something happened that if it hadn't happened, your life might have gone in a different direction. But the fact that it did happen, it changed the course of your life. And I could think of something. And he said, now make a decision that will change the course of your life. And I decided, that's it. I'm leaving my job. I'm leaving the pharmaceutical industry. I'm going to do what Robbins is doing, but with my own science fusion into it. And I'll find my direction if I do that. And I literally resigned the next day. And so it's almost like I needed someone to give me a little lift to say, you really can do that. And for me, I needed to be on that. If I hadn't been on that Tony Robbins Unleash the Power of Within in Cardiff 1999, I don't think I would have had the courage or the faith. Sometimes you just need to be, motivated up to be able to do something. And I don't think I would have had. Maybe it would have happened at another time in my life, but I definitely wouldn't have done it then. It was just a background dream that I didn't think I would ever do anything with.
Wow, that's brilliant, David. Yeah. And now 11 books later. Look at you. Books later, amazing.
Yeah.
God, what's your intention or hope for this book, Why Woo Woo Works?
There's a vast community of people who not only are practitioners of alternative practices, but who also really think that way and believe that way. And I think often they're minimized, and I wanted to provide evidence for them. One, that it would give them more faith in themselves. And secondly, that it would help people who are skeptical to understand what they do and why they do what they do. And when I say people skeptical, I mean people that they know, their family and friends. Because, many people that I've known over the years, for example, I'll give you a frequent example. So a husband and wife, and the wife's a practitioner of Reiki, or she works with crystals. Her husband is quite skeptical, but they're still together, and it doesn't cause a rift. But she would always love if her husband could understand a bit more of what she did. So my hope in this as well is for the partners of people who work in the alternative fields can read this and begin to understand. I understand why my partner does this. I understand now. I can see that it works and why it works. And so that was a big part of my motivation. Really was to help people who are in that field and help other people to understand why they do what they do and realize there is really something in woo-woo, that it doesn't have to be a different world. We can find a way of fusing these two seemingly separate worlds and walking together as friends rather than as enemies in two different camps.
I love it. I love it. All your listeners can go and buy this for your partners right now. It'll make the perfect gift.
Yeah.
100%, mate. Fantastic. Yeah, I never thought of that. Wow. There's so many people I see that are like, I wish my partner would get me in this area, this field, for sure. Mate, I'm going to ask you one more question to wrap up the podcast that I ask everyone on the show, David. And that is, with everything we've covered today, what would you like to leave our listeners to ponder on?
Oh, good question. Okay, for me, I would say one of the things that I've put most effort into teaching and writing about over the last, 5 to 10 years has been kindness and the importance of kindness. And even that kindness is contagious. Kindness has one of the highest R numbers of anything, much higher than, the coronavirus. Kindness has an R number between 4 and 5. It's highly contagious. In other words, when you be kind to someone, that person will likely be kind to 5 other people over the course of the rest of the day because of how you made them feel. So it's highly contagious. And so I would like people to ponder, if I made it my goal to help as many people as I can as I go through my day, what might the impact of that be? I don't mean like big things like you're literally changing someone's life. I mean just smiling at someone and in a way that says, I see you, or just paying someone a compliment, or just if someone asks for your help, just finding the time to offer them a helping hand. So I'm not meaning life-changing kindnesses, but just the everyday, ordinary opportunities that present to almost every single person every day. If I just fully engaged in helping and made an effort to actually lift people up at moments during the day, given how contagious that kindness is, might that change the world if we all did that a bit more?
Amen to that. Yeah. Amen to that. I think we need it more than ever right now. That's for
definitely.
sure, David.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it. Australia, I'm sure your book's going to be available Amazon.
Yeah, it's available at Amazon and all the other online retailers as well. It will be in some physical shops as well. I don't know which ones, but certainly it's on all the online retailers. It's available.
And are you on Audible?
Yes, it's on Audible as well. And it's me in my Scottish accent.
Oh, good man. Perfect.
Speaking it. Yeah.
The Audible book is the best experience when the author reads it. I'm truly grateful.
Yeah. Do you know, I recorded it in a studio quite close to where I live, and the studio is called Good Vibrations. Yeah. It's so cool.
Perfect. Yeah. And where can I send them if they just want to learn more about your work? I'll make sure the link is in the show notes as well.
My website, drdavidhamilton.com. That you can, from there you can pretty much find most things. And I will probably, once your link is live, I'll have a link on my website to this podcast as well.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for coming on the show today. That was an amazing conversation. I love your enthusiasm for this work. It always gets me. I always learn something as well every time I speak to you, mate. And it's brilliant. There's a few areas I really want to dive deeper in with that. So thanks, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. I always love our conversations, and it seems quite easy and free flowing. It feels like we're sitting right beside each other having a chat over a coffee or a beer or something. It feels been really easy. So thanks for making it easy for me to communicate today.
You're welcome. And hopefully the listeners feel that as well.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, mate. Thank you.